Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and do you sense it? There's been a disturbance of some kind in the Force, a great shift in the Star Wars galaxy. It all started in January 11th of 2021 when Lucasfilm announced that they were re-establishing the Lucasfilm game brand. You know, the studio that used to develop games like Monkey Island and the X-Wing series, Dark Forces. The same studio that in the mid-90s was rebranded as LucasArts and started working with other studios like BioWare, Pandemic, and Obsidian, creating some of the best series in Star Wars gaming history. Starting with my personal favorite, Knights of the Old Republic. You also had the Jedi Knight series and Battlefront. I truly think that period was like a golden age for Star Wars gaming. It's also when I was growing up, so I'm pretty nostalgic about that. I have a clear bias for that period. But then something horrible happened. Something more terrible than Order 66, more cataclysmic than the fall of the Republic, something more tragic than Tim, who had the ambition to land a smoking hot Latina baddie but lacked the fortitude to keep her. Press F to pay respects. You see, Disney would buy Lucasfilm in 2012. And here's the thing, at the time, George Lucas was tired. He didn't really seem to have the energy to continue running Star Wars. I think part of this was the fandom were kind of grating, and also, I noticed there wasn't a lot of content coming out in Star Wars during that time period. You know, there were the prequel films and the cartoons, but that was basically it. There were big gaps where we just weren't getting content except for novels. And I also think it's pretty tough to dedicate so much of your life to just one thing, and George Lucas had enough. And Disney brings the resources and energy to take Star Wars to the next level, or at least in theory. In practice, what we've received since Disney has taken over Lucasfilm is really just mixed results. We have some really high-level, great content. I would say like The Mandalorian, Rogue One, Andor, some really good games here and there. But most of the stuff is kind of just meh in the middle, and then you have some outright trash as well, which is, in all honesty, that's how the Lucasfilm era was like as well. There was a lot of garbage in the expanded universe, and then there's some really good stuff in the expanded universe. It wasn't always 9 out of 10s for Star Wars. There was a lot of mid stuff. Now, unlike a lot of creators, I don't dislike Disney because of its artistic vision or perceived politics. I actually think politics, even radical ideologies that I personally don't agree with, have a place in art. Better there than in front of my apartment or something like that. My problem with Disney is my problem with a lot of corporations. They can be ruthless and greedy and cowardly all at the same time while still making a subpar product. And what makes Disney even worse is that it plays itself off as a magical kingdom and experience for children when it routinely makes pretty stupid and at times unethical decisions that kind of shatters that illusion for me. Now, Disney isn't Philip Morris or Monsanto level evil, right? It's kind of mid-tier in kind of how bad its corporate behavior is. But because I personally really like Star Wars, it's definitely something, I pay a lot more attention to. And even as a really big Star Wars fan, I would never invest in a company like Disney because it's simply bloated and antiquated. It really is a legacy company that has tried to rebuild itself multiple times throughout its history, but it has the bureaucracy of a public sector organization. It simply is not able to function properly, I think, in the modern economy and modern industry. They have entire cadres of middle managers and producers that help keep every Disney movie and TV show unnecessarily over budget and devoid of artistic clarity, except for Andor. They really did step back on that one and let Tony Gilroy take the reins, which is surprising and probably the path they should be taking more in the future. But anyway, the thing that really bothered me wasn't, Disney taking over Lucasfilm. I think that was inevitable given the size of Lucasfilm and George Lucas's interest at the time. The problem is what Disney did with Lucasfilm once it took over. First, it was the closure of LucasArts. Disney made an assessment that the gaming wing of the business was not profitable. There were multiple canceled projects, including Star Wars 1313. Yes, we're still talking about that in 2025. And honestly, if I were just a shareholder and not a Star Wars fan, I probably would have agreed with that decision when it was made at the time. See, in the 2000s, your average character model in a video game had 5 to 10,000 polygons. Seems like a lot compared to the 2D side-scrolling platformers we had before that, but by 2010, when Disney took over LucasArts, your average video game character jumped to 30,000 polygons and sometimes even more. At the same time, on the Silicon side, Moore's Law was slowing down, making development much trickier and expensive. LucasArts' longer development cycles were not only costly for the game-making process, but there was a risk that new technology would make games obsolete in the middle of their development cycle. cycle. And so while from a fan's point of view, LucasArts had reached its perfect stage, it kept strong control of the IP and storytelling, and at the same time worked with truly revolutionary and passionate mid-sized game developers making awesome games. That didn't really fit Disney's business model. What they wanted was a sustainable, repeatable, and scalable type of revenue. And to them, LucasArts was unpredictable. It was a huge money sink, and it only occasionally created bangers. There was no consistency. And that is just unacceptable to one of the most powerful publicly traded media companies in the world. And herein lies, the biggest problem with our modern capitalist system. Disney has to report earnings 4 times a year. Every publicly traded company in the United States does as well. And if you aren't perfect and capable of pitching a story that shareholders believe every time during an earnings report, you can see a flight of capital which can severely limit your ability to operate. In the last 40 years, the United States economy has depended more and more on financial engineering and our advanced capital markets for economic growth, which means that our financial markets are now loaded with speculators who rotate money around different sectors and companies like they're changing clothes every morning. This creates hyper-competitive environments for companies like Disney that have to always make sure that they're bringing out good news and eliminating any type of inefficiency. And unfortunately, a lot of times inefficiency in the public sector is just short-term inefficiency. And you need short-term inefficiency to build long-term goals, brands, video games that take 5 years, like Rockstar does. And that's just not something that is built into a lot of these companies. They're just unable to take that kind of risk. This is why you and me, we feel like everything from movies, TV shows, all of this stuff we used to love, it's not just that we are getting older. There is less creativity, less risk-taking. There's just less good content because the financial environment doesn't allow for it. And so this whole dynamic, the constant reports of earnings, greedy and short-sighted speculators severely fucks up the efficient market hypothesis. And also leads to increasingly, let's be honest and just call it criminal behavior by companies as they continue to desperately try to do anything to maintain their stock prices. I mean, this whole AI buildup right now is exceptionally sketchy. I mean, this $500 billion, $500 billion valuation for OpenAI is loaded with red flags. There's a lot of vendor funding, circular funding from all the companies that surround it. It's where all the schemers and scammers and big idea people are gathered at this point. And I think this bubble is going to hurt us. But that is our system, and in many ways it brings out the worst in all of us. It incentivizes greed and risk. Our competition is only just about money. It does not value creativity or innovation, long-term results. And so, Disney buys Star Wars and then shuts down LucasArts. Something that probably wouldn't survive unless it were like a private company. And for Disney, that means they no longer have to compete against big game developers. They could just license their wonderful IP to them. That's guaranteed payment for the shareholders and very little cost to affect the bottom line. And to make matters even worse, the company that I hate more than anything, Electronic Arts, manages to secure the entire Star Wars IP, as in they're the only ones who can make Star Wars video games for almost like a decade. Electronic Arts first isn't a game developer. It's more of a portfolio operator, and it sucked up literally all of the best mid-sized game developers of our childhood. Maxis, which created The Sims, Westwood, Red Alert, Command & Conquer, BioWare, of course, which made all of the best RPGs in the industry. Electronic Arts was this big, giant gorilla that had tons of institutional backing, and the only thing they were really concerned about was making money in any way possible. And so, of course, their titles, their games, everything they bought became worse and worse. They started closing a lot of the wonderful studios that they had promised not to close. We begin to see the rise of microtransactions, yearly Madden and FIFA releases with no changes to the gameplay whatsoever. It's taken more than a decade for Electronic Arts to slowly crumble and die because of these horrible practices. And along the way, we lost probably some of the best gaming studios in history. Ironically, Electronic Arts is now being taken over by a Saudi wealth fund in a purchase that is being guided by the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Forget about ethical concerns. We're truly making America great again by scamming the Saudis into buying destroying this radioactive heap of garbage. I really hope Electronic Arts dies, but the Saudis are pretty easy with money. They usually fling money at projects without thinking, so who knows what EA is going to turn into. I imagine it's going to lean more heavily into the subscription model, microtransaction. Maybe it can involve more gambling into its stuff. Who knows, man? It's going to get wild. It does seem like with advancements in technology, with all these LLMs, smaller and hungrier developers can now step up with innovative ideas and passion, even if they don't have as much money. That is a really good sign. And maybe one day even the NFL license can be ripped out of Electronic Arts' possession, and then we can finally have some good NFL games. So as EA hopefully enters its last chapter, it only makes sense that Disney, Lucasfilm, would bring back Lucasfilm Games as a brand. And we're already starting to see new studios jump in and try to develop more Star Wars games. Before, there was really just the Battlefront game from DICE and the Jedi Survivor series. One of the more recent announcements is the reveal of the Fate of the Old Republic game, a new addition to the Knights of the Old Republic series. This has me obviously very excited, and Casey Hudson, the original project director of the first KOTOR game, is back as well. He also did the Mass Effect series and Jade Empire, so he knows what he's doing. And yes, from what I can tell, the Fate of the Old Republic will be a single-player, narrative-driven story, and that is a big deal because Disney has different motives from EA at this point. EA doesn't like to innovate, it doesn't like creating good games. What it likes is captive audiences that it can milk for extra money, aka microtransactions, buying cosmetic upgrades for Battlefront and, stuff like that. Disney is also greedy, but not as short-sighted. It understands the value of brands, and it sees that the Star Wars IP is hurting. It's in decline. The sequel trilogy was botched. They didn't even have a full story when they started filming the first movie. They just kind of made up things along the way, and we all noticed. And then we had the COVID pandemic streaming wars, where all the major platforms were burning cash at incredible rates in order to grab as much market share as possible. That led to Star Wars burnout, and also not the highest quality shows like Kenobi series and the Book of Boba Fett series. Even shows like Andor and movies like Rogue One, while popular amongst the fan base, didn't necessarily grow audiences, or more specifically younger audiences, who Disney loves introducing to their larger ecosystem of parks and hotels. That's actually where the majority of Disney's revenue comes from, by the way. It's not actually from streaming or movies at all. Their whole company is a funnel to sell toys. Well, it used to be to sell toys, but now it's to bring people to the amusement parks. And so while Disney initially made a ton of money on this IP, now it is struggling to monetize. And that's probably because there isn't a clear path or story that defines the franchise anymore. The Skywalker saga is more or less over, and what's left, Andor, Rogue One, The Bad Batch, most of this stuff takes place in the background of the Skywalker saga. We're literally following stories about background characters at this point. I don't have a problem with that because I really like getting deep into the lore. I love the universe, but this is a bad sign for the IP. And then you have attempts to try to reach new younger audiences, like with the Skeleton Crew, but again, these kind of movies, despite being, moderately successful and fun to watch, they just can't capture audiences' attentions like Star Wars did, 50, 60 years ago, when it was basically one of the few big IPs of its time. There's just less competition at the time. And it seems like Disney is really pulling back on making content. It's canceled a lot of planned movies and TV shows. I recently just heard about the cancellation of A Hunt for Ben Solo, which honestly sounds like a really good idea. Steven Soderbergh was involved with that. The prequels were pretty poorly received when they first came out. It was only because of supplemental content like the Clone Wars series that fleshed out the characters in the background that made the prequels more acceptable and beloved by the audience. I think you have to do that with the sequel trilogy at this point. You do have to make more background content to kind of make that story seem more coherent, but maybe Disney won't try. I don't know. Ultimately, this might just be a financial decision that, hey, movies and TV shows, they just don't make economic sense anymore. Not like they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And again, this is because in today's day and age, there are just too many options for entertainment. The audiences are much more segmented. Not everyone is going into theaters to watch movies. And so when you do spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a movie, you're not going to make as much in theaters. There are no VHS or DVD sales. What you really are trying to do at this point is to attract people to your streaming platform so that they can be a subscriber. And this is why Disney has shifted from movies to TV series, which provide more content on their platforms. And here's the thing, as a YouTuber, as someone who used to work in more traditional movie on bigger sets, I used to DP sometimes, director of photography, not what you're thinking. And yeah, even those tiny shoots I was involved in, much larger than what I do with YouTube. I keep things super minimal. Like I can basically take this whole YouTube channel on the road anywhere I go. I just need a camera and a laptop. And yes, I'm not gonna get as much views as Disney will in their content, but you know, per view, I'm definitely spending a lot more getting audience attention. And that's a big problem for legacy media's business kind of, business? Why is my brain farting? Business plan? Now, the big Hollywood studio production model has been under threat for decades now, but it's really starting to show its age, especially because it's becoming harder to raise money now and fund movies because of larger macro issues in the economy. There still will be great Hollywood films, but they're just gonna be less really successful ones. The bar has to be really high to rip kids away from their phones. And I think Disney understands this. This is why they're licensing their own content to OpenAI. This means that Disney understands that AI is not only inevitable, but in the future, audiences won't just consume, they'll probably also create. And Disney doesn't want to stand in the way of that change. They want to get a piece of the action in the same way that, YouTube and Google get about 40% of my ad revenue. And so for 2026, I think there's only going to be one Star Wars movie, the Mandalorian thing, and maybe the Ahsoka TV series. There's a clear attempt here to save money on these legacy type movie productions. They're going to still make them, of course, because they want to keep that franchise alive. But the silver lining here might be just the shift towards gaming, because traditional gaming doesn't really have the same pressure from outside disruptors. And more importantly, most video games are much cheaper to produce than feature films, especially Star Wars films and TV shows. And specifically Disney productions, you can just add another like 20% per day for shooting for some reason. Games like Fate of the Old Republic, if they ever do happen, will be not only cheaper to produce, but will also provide 40 to 100 hours of gameplay for audiences, which honestly beats any other type of media format. And for those of you who do game, you know that these experiences will bring you into the Star Wars universe in ways that are incredibly immersive and enjoyable, especially something that is like KOTOR. I've always said that what really brought me into the Star Wars universe wasn't actually the movies or even the TV shows necessarily. It was the novels and, more importantly, the video games. KOTOR, Republic Commandos, Star Wars Galaxies even. I mean, heck, KOTOR single-handedly launched the Old Republic period, which might one day even make it to big screens. And that's kind of how ideas can be tested in video games, and if they are, received with a lot of positivity, Disney could one day grow something out of that. It's the perfect test bed, because even if the ideas of the story and the characters are bad, as long as the gameplay is good, they're still going to make money. So it's kind of a win-win situation for Lucasfilm. One of the things I'm most excited about is the rumored Star Wars either RTS, something like Total War style game, or a more XCOM tactical turn-based shooter kind of thing. Both of those I would definitely play. I'd probably even stream it, like that genre. I just haven't really seen properly from Star Wars in a long time. Another really smart thing about making these games is that they will be geared towards the demographic that Disney is struggling to hold on to the most, young male audiences. The execution is going to be hit or miss, that much is for sure. I mean, Star Wars Outlaws, while great in concept, unfortunately was made by Ubisoft. But I kind of like the trend this is going towards. I think they just need to find better developers to make these type of games, maybe hungrier ones. Although, it's not easy to craft an open world, and there aren't many companies like Ubisoft that have the resources and experience in, making one that is relatively seamless. Star Wars Eclipse is going to be a narrative, choice-driven game placed during the High Republic. It looks to be visually beautiful, but we don't really know much else about that. But this is another example of Lucasfilm using video games to tell what seems like a very complex and deep story, which I think is a shift away from the streaming and movie model. Plus, the High Republic period has really just had a lackluster reception. The novels and comics are just okay, nothing special in my opinion. And while it's refreshing that The Acolyte wasn't just another Dave Filoni fan film and tried to really branch out, the execution just wasn't great. And the show was widely hated because of this exhausted culture war. But Eclipse could do what the TV show and books could not: create a vehicle for storytelling that attracts the base Star Wars audience to this new era. So there you have it, guys. That's my assessment of what is happening in the Disney Star Wars universe. A lot of crazy things, a lot of macroeconomic pressure going on that is forcing change, a lot of technology that's coming that is forcing change. But yeah, I see this truly as the end of this first 10 years of Disney rule over Star Wars, right, from 2015 until now. And now we're going to get to this new era where I think Disney's going to take a step back. It's going to try to throw out a lot of smaller projects, and hopefully some of it sticks, and we'll have a new direction. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.